In this video, let's discuss about computed properties. In our earlier videos, we have discussed about stored properties and lazy stored properties. Actually, it is the ask from one of our subscribers where he requested to have a video on computed properties as well. So that's where I'm doing this video. So we know what are constant properties and what are stored properties, stored constant properties and stored variable properties. For example, let's say this is a constant stored property. For example, let's say I have something called a model called person. Okay, in this, for example, it is age. Okay, so this is a constant stored property where it gets stored, and it can be variable also. This is a variable stored variable property. Okay, these are stored in the memory. Lazy properties we have discussed. If there is a if it is a huge operation or if it is a costly instantiation, we use the lazy keyword and we initialize, and actually that gets initialized and that gets memory will be allocated at the time when we first time access it. Okay, but what are computed properties? So that one let's quickly discuss in this video. In addition to stored properties, classes, structures and enumerations, which are technically models in software programming language, they can define computed properties which don't actually store a value. That means they don't store the value in the memory. Instead, they provide a getter and an optional setter. Let's discuss what is that. Let's say, for example, I have something called first name. Let's write it fully neatly. I have something called first name, which is, and last name. So first name and last name are variables stored properties of the structure. So we can have a compute. For example, if I need to build a full name, I can write a computed property like this, which has they can provide a getter, that means get, and it can also have a setter. That means if you are setting the value, why? Because a computed property can never be a constant. Why? Because its value will not be known, and why? Because its value depends on other values. So let's discuss that. So for example, new name. Okay, so in this case, what we can return, this is first name plus, so it's typically first name space last name. Okay, get is done. What if I want to set it? I want to set the full name. Then typically what happens, if I set the full name, that means first name and last name, again I need to change it, correct? So how can I do it? Let new parts or something is equal to, so the new name whatever assigned plus we split by separator, which is called space. Why? Because it is the space, correct? Now actually this first name is, this is a simple logic, we don't need to worry much about it, which is the first one. If it is I can put it as empty, and the same concept applies to last name as well. So that means I have provided a setter for this as well. Okay, which is the last one. Okay, this we are calling it as computed property. It will not be stored in the memory. Why? Because it is just calculated at the when it is accessed, and it is calculated whenever you access it. So just to see that, let's create a person. Just a second. Okay, let me see if there are no errors here, so that why I cannot assign a value. Okay, I need to mention it as string. That's why it is complaining. Okay, it is string. Why? Because first can be anything. Why? Because it's an array. First can be anything, last can be anything. I need to typecast it, and as it is an optional, I have given this value. So person, first name I would give John Smith, let's say. Okay, now if I don't need to call any method or something. Why? Because the advantage of computed properties, if we have to define it, is one thing is we can access them like normal properties. Okay, so that is what I'm doing it here now. When I run it, see, sorry, it should be okay. Let me print it so that p dot full name. So if I do it, John Smith, it's separated. Now what if I, so it should be where, if I need to assign it, p dot full name is equal to, if I say Alex some Meshkin. Now what I would expect, the first name should be Alex and second name should be Meshkin as per this logic, correct? Why? Because I'm passing new name. Okay, so let me check it now. What is the first name and what is the, whether the setter is here, of course the getter is working, correct? That is the reason you have seen first name space last name. And if you want, here you can assign respected or something, or if you know the gender, you can have Mr. or something like that, or dear or something like that. So if I see full name, see, dear John Smith, correct? Okay, now first name and last name. Now if I run it, now let's see what it does. Alex and Meshkin. So this logic worked, and it is able to, now the this objects first name and last name got changed because you assigned full name. So that is the reason we can access them like normal properties. Okay, next one is we have shorthand syntaxes also. Like for example, if you don't want to give any name, something like this, the default value for setter is, so let me note down the takeaways. Default name for the new value is new value itself. Okay, if you don't mention, this is new value. For example, if you don't mention anything and this is a shorthand operator, now instead of new name it is new value and nothing changes. This is the shorthand syntax. But new value is always if you want to explicitly mention. Why? Because boss, I am passing a new full name so that my developers will be well known of what I am passing. I want to go with that. Okay, you can go with that, or you can just omit it and set the new value. So this is shorthand operator and nothing changes. If you can run it, you will get the same output. And you can have you can have only read only you can have only this is having setter also, and you can have only read only computed properties. That means you don't want to set it, but you just want to calculate it. Okay, of course you can't set it. Why? Because that is what it is complaining. Cannot assign a property full name is a get only property. Now it has become, this is get only. That means read only computed property. You cannot set it. Okay, so you cannot set it. This also we can write. Okay, that means I just need the full name. So outside world can't set the full name. Okay, and for this also there is a shorthand operator that when it is read only, you don't need to explicitly mention getter, and it also works. This is the shorthand operator. See, it is as simple as and this will be stored, last name will be stored, this will not be stored. So not stored in the memory. Okay, this is not stored in the memory. So pretty much if we have to discuss much about, it can provide a getter and it can provide an optional setter, but getter is important. Without getter there is no meaning of having a computed property, and this is a shorthand operator. It should be always variable, and it's why, because its value depends on the internal state of the internal properties of the object. Okay, so those are computed properties, and read-only computed properties also we have discussed. So it doesn't store a value directly, but in a way provides an option just to access something like a normal property. They are defined with a var keyword and with a block of code. Okay, and with a block of code just for the calculation, and it cannot and it will not depend on any outside factors, and as why, because it obviously it's not a function, so it will not depend on any outside factors. Now there is one question that can come into anyone's mind, saying, why don't I use something like this? So what is the difference? Correct. So it's returning something, it's not having any properties. So technically speaking, p dot get full name also, you will get the same value, to be frank. Correct. So it's dear John Smith, and it's dear John Smith. Okay, so when to go for a computed property and when to go for a function? So why can't I write a function? Why should I go for a computed property? So this is very important. Why? Because we need to be crystal clear on when to go for a computed property and when to go for a method. So both computed properties and functions can be used to encapsulate logic and perform calculations. Both to encapsulate logic and to perform the calculations. So when to use computed properties and when to use functions? So computed properties should be used when the value being calculated is an inherent property of an object. When the value being calculated is an inherent property of an object. Of course, person full name is the inherent property of an object. Correct. It's not an action or a behavior. So in this case, we'll go for a computed property and not a function. And computed properties are access like properties and can be used in the same way, which makes them convenient for getting and setting the values. So instead of me calling a method name, see, I can simply call like p dot full name, like p dot first name. I can call p dot full name. So we can access them like normal properties. So then we go for computed properties. Computed properties can also be used to ensure that the calculated value is always up to date. That means if I put a print statement, if we change first name calculated, let me put here. So for example, let's forget about all this. So here it is John Smith. Correct. Now as it is a variable, if I type first name is equal to Alex and last name is equal to Meshkin. Okay, now what happens? Now if I do the same, it will be calculated again and again. Okay, so if I do this, so it's here I called it, it got calculated. Now again I called it and it calculated it again. So that's basically that's mainly the difference. The value is up to date and they can be made read only to prevent external modification. We can make it read only to prevent external modifications. So we can access it like a property and its value is always up to date. Why? Because it's directly reflects the internal inherent property of an object. So in these scenarios we go for the computed property, where we can access them like normal properties, and the computed property should be used when the value being calculated is an inherent property of an object. This is very important point. When the value being calculated is an inherent property of an object. In this case, full name is the inherent property of an object that is calculated based on first name and last name. Okay, now when to go for function? On the other hand, function should be used when the logic being performed is an action or a behavior. So for example, so if I calculate, for example, calculate income tax or something for income tax. Why? Because tax percentage for the year or something like this is there, which depends on some external factors, which is having some parameters or something, then of course we need to go for functions or methods, right? In this case I can't go for the computed properties, I have to go for why? Because it's an action, it's calculating something, or a behavior, or save to server, okay, or something like that, if it is an action or a behavior. So functions, we go for functions if it is an action or behavior. So action or behavior in the sense, for example, if it is not a person, for example, let's say walk, this can't be a computed property. Why? Because it will not return anything. Then here actually person walks, correct? It's an action or it's a behavior, okay? So in this case we can't go for the computed properties, it's function. That doesn't necessarily return a value. Walk doesn't necessarily return a value. Function can have parameters and can perform multiple operations, making them more flexible than computed properties. It can perform multiple, that means func save and move to, or let's say for example this person, right? Calculate age and save to server, let's say. For example, we have persons date of birth, we can calculate the age and we can save it to the server, correct? That means it can have multiple actions, and parameters, correct? So in this case computed properties, they don't work, we need to go for functions. And functions are also used when the calculations is expensive or requires heavy computation, since functions can be called only when needed, whereas computed properties are this will be calculated whenever we access it. Even for a print you access it, this entire calculation will happen, correct? Whereas if it is a function, we can call it whenever it is needed only, which are expensive. So in general it's best to use computed properties when the calculation is simple, and best to use functions when the calculation is complex, okay? So here we can say like when the calculation is simple, and function I can say like when the calculation is complex, multiple actions and parameters. So here it's on computed properties, let me put it like this, okay. So computed properties concept is easy, but it's very confusing when to go for a computer. For example, you need to write a full name, so at that point you need to understand, for example, any other inherent property, then you need to if you feel like it's an inherent property, then you need to go for a computed property, and you need to think through. It should not be having multiple steps like this. Calculating age is one step and saving to server another step, correct? And it should not be having multiple actions and parameters when the calculation is complex, okay? Functions when the calculation is more complex, and if it involves multiple operations or external factors like in the previous example we have done calculate income tax, where we need to pass some parameter like that year in income tax percentage something and all. And also functions we need to use when you need to perform an action or a series of actions, which we just discussed, rather than just calculate a value. Functions are suitable for encapsulating complex logic actually, or behavior that requires multiple steps or actions to be executed, something like this, multiple steps or actions if needed. So that's basically the concept of computed properties and what is its syntax with a var keyword and with a block of code you can provide, and it's for simple calculations. We can access the advantages, we can access let them like normal properties, default name for the new value. For the setter we can add getters and setters, and we can omit the setter and have only get only computed properties. And there is a shorthand representation for getter and setter as well, and we can write read only, that means get only computed properties, which is like the full name in this case. When the value being calculated is an inherent property of an object, it's good to have a computed property. Full name is it's like an inherent property. Okay, when the calculation is simple, something like this, we go for computed properties. Whereas functions, if it is an action or behavior, if it is work, it doesn't make any sense to write it as a computed property. We need to write a method. For example, multiple actions and parameters, if it is having multiple actions and parameters, of course you need to go with the functions. When the calculation is complex also, you need to go with the functions. Why? Because computed properties can be accessed like normal properties, and whenever you access it, it will be recalculated every time. And if the calculation is expensive, then reiterating will become more expensive. Okay, and you can get it, you can set it, and based on your set you can change the internal properties. That's where these are very handy, and they don't store any memory. These are not stored properties. These values are calculated at a runtime based on the dependencies. Okay, so it's very important. Every time you should not go for functions whereas a computed property makes sense, and you should not go for a computed property whereas a function makes sense. That is very, very important. As your developer experience increases, or when you're more experienced developer, these are all the things that you need to consider and write a very good programming so that it makes sense, like it makes the code readable and look good. Okay, I hope this post is useful. Thank you.